Journey to the River Sea by Eva Ibbotson. Chapter 1. It was a good school, one of the best in London. Miss Banks and her sister Emily believed that girls should be taught as thoroughly and as carefully as boys. They'd bought 3 houses in a quiet square, a pleasant place with plane trees and well-behaved pigeons, and put up a brass plate saying, "The Mayfair Academy for Young Ladies," and they had prospered. For while the sisters prized proper learning, they also prized good manners, thoughtfulness, and care for others, and the girls learnt both algebra and needlework. Moreover, they took in children whose parents were abroad and needed somewhere to spend the holidays. Now, some 30 years later, in the autumn of 1910, the school had a waiting list, and those girls who went there knew how lucky they were. All the same, there were times when they were very bored. Miss Carlyle was giving a geography lesson in the big classroom which faced the street. She was a good teacher, but even the best teachers have trouble trying to make the rivers of southern England seem unusual and exciting. "Now, can anyone tell me the exact source of the River Thames?" she asked. She passed her eyes along the rows of desks, missed the plump Hermione, the worried-looking Daisy, and stopped by a girl in the front row. "Don't chew the end of your pigtail," she was about to say, but she didn't, for it was a day when this particular girl had a right to chew the curved ends of her single heavy plait of hair. Maya had seen the motor stop outside the door, and had seen old Mr. Murray in his velvet-collared coat go into the house. Mr. Murray was Maya's guardian, and today, as everyone knew, he was bringing news about her future. Maya raised her eyes to Miss Carlyle and struggled to concentrate. In the room full of fair and light brown heads, she stood out with her pale triangular face, her wildly spaced dark eyes. Her ears, laid bare by the heavy rope of black hair, gave her an unprotected look. "The Thames rises in the Cotswold Hills," she began in her low, clear voice, "in a small hamlet." Only what small hamlet she had no idea. The door opened, 20 heads turned. "Would Maya Fielding come to Miss Banks' room, please?" said the maid. Maya rose to her feet. Fear is the cause of all evil, she told herself, but she was afraid of the future, afraid of the unknown, afraid of the way someone who is alone in the world. Miss Banks was standing behind her desk. Her sister, Miss Emily, stood beside her. Miss Murray was in a leather chair by a table rustling papers. Mr. Murray was Maya's guardian, but he was also a lawyer, and never forget it. Things had to be done carefully and slowly and written down. Maya looked round at the assembled faces. They looked cheerful, but that could mean anything, and she bent down to pat Miss Banks' spaniel, finding comfort in the feel of his round, warm head. "Well, Maya, we have good news," said Miss Banks, a frightening woman to many, now in her 60s, with an amazing bust which would have done splendidly on the prow of a sailing ship. She smiled at the girl standing in front of her, a clever child and a brave one who had fought hard to overcome the devastating blow of her parents' death in a train crash in Egypt 2 years earlier. The staff knew how Maya had wept night after night under her pillow, trying not to wake her friends. If good fortune was to come her way, there was no one who deserved it more. "We have found your relatives," Miss Banks went on. And will they..." Maya began, but she couldn't finish. Mr. Murray now took over. "They are willing to give you a home." Maya took a deep breath. A home? She had spent her holidays for the past 2 years in the school. Everyone was friendly and kind, but a home? "Not only that," said Miss Emily, "but it turns out that the Carters have twin daughters about your age." She smiled broadly and nodded as though she herself had managed the birth of twins for Maya's benefit. Mr. Murray patted a large folder on his knee. "As you know, we have been searching for a long time for anyone related to your father. We knew that there was a second cousin, a Mr. Clifford Carter, but all efforts to trace him failed until 2 months ago when we heard that he had emigrated 6 years earlier. He'd left England with his family." So where's he now?" Maya asked. There was a moment of silence. It was as though the good news had now run out, and Mr. Murray looked solemn and cleared his throat. He's living. The Carters are living on the Amazon. In South America, in Brazil, put in Miss Banks. Maya lifted her head. On the Amazon, she said. In the jungle, do you mean? Not exactly. Mr. Carter is a rubber planter. He has a house on the river not far from the city of Manaus. It's a perfectly civilised place. I have, of course, arranged for the consul out there to visit it. He knows the family and they are very respectable. There was a pause. I thought you would wish me to make a regular payment to the Carters for your keep and your schooling. As you know, your father left you very well provided for. Oh, yes, of course. I would like that. I'd like to pay my share. But Maya was not thinking of her money. She was thinking of the Amazon, of rivers full of leeches, of dark forests and hostile Indians with blowpipes and nameless insects which burrowed into flesh. How could she live there? And to give herself courage, she said, What are they called? Who? The old man was still wondering about the arrangements he'd made with Mr. Carter. Had he offered too much for Maya's keep? The twins. What are the names of the twins? Oh, Beatrice and Gwendolen, said Miss Emily. They've written you a note. She handed Maya a single sheet of paper. Dear Maya, the girls had written, we hope you'll come and live with us. We think it would be nice. Maya saw them as she read, fair and curly-haired and pretty, everything she longed to be and wasn't. If they could live in the jungle, so could she. When do I go? She asked. At the end of the month. It has all worked out quite well because the Carters have engaged a new governess and she will travel with you. A governess? In the jungle? Oh, how strange it all sounded. But the letter from the girls had given her heart. They were looking forward to having her. They wanted her. Surely it'd be all right. Well, let's just hope it's for the best, said Miss Banks after Maya had left the room. They were more serious now. It was a long way to send a child to an unknown family, and there was Maya's music to consider. She played the piano well, but what interested the staff was Maya's voice. Her mother had been a singer. Maya's own voice was sweet and true. Though she didn't want to sing professionally, her eagerness to learn new songs and understand them was exceptional. But what was that set against the chance of a loving home? The Carters had seemed really pleased to take Maya, and she was an attractive child. The consul have promised to keep me informed, said Mr. Murray, and the meeting broke up. Meanwhile, Maya's return to the classroom meant the end of the tributaries of the Thames. Tomorrow we will have our lesson on the Amazon and the rivers of South America, said Miss Carlyle. I want you all to find out at least one interesting fact about it. She smiled at Maya. And I shall expect you to tell us how you will travel and for how long, so that we can all share your adventure. There was no doubt about it. Maya was a heroine, but not the kind that people envied, more the kind that got burnt at the stake. By the time her friends had clustered around her with "ooh" and "ah" and cries of distress, Maya wanted nothing except to run away and hide. But she didn't. She asked permission to go to the library after supper. The library at the academy was a good one. That night Maya sat alone on top of the mahogany library steps, and she read, and she read, and she read. She read about the great broad-leaf trees of the rainforest pierced by sudden rays of sunshine. She read about the travellers who had explored the maze of rivers and found 1,000 plants and animals that had never been seen before. She read about brilliantly coloured birds flashing between the laden branches, macaws and hummingbirds and parakeets, and butterflies the size of saucers, and curtains of sweetly scented orchids trailing from the trees. She read about the wisdom of the Indians, who could cure sickness and wounds that no one in Europe understood. Those who think of the Amazon as a green hell, she read in an old book with tattered spine, bring only their own fears and prejudices to this amazing land, for whether it is a place of hell or heaven rests in yourself, and those who go with courage and an open mind may find themselves in paradise. Maya looked up from the book. I can do it, she vowed. I can make it a heaven, and I will. Matron found her there long after bedtime, still perched on the ladder, but she didn't scold her for being there. There was a strange look on the child's face, as though she was already in another country. Everyone came well prepared to the geography lesson on the following day. You start, Hermione, said Miss Carlyle. What did you find out about the Amazon? Hermione looked anxiously at Maya. There are huge crocodiles in the rivers that can snap your head off in one bite. Only they're not called crocodiles, they're called alligators because their snouts are fatter, but they're just as fierce. And if you put one hand in the water, there are these piranhas that strip all the flesh off your bones, every single bit. They look just like ordinary fish, but their teeth are terrible, said Melanie. Daisy offered a mosquito which bit you and gave you yellow fever. You turn as yellow as a lemon and then you die, she said. And it's so hot the sweat absolutely runs off you in buckets. Not sweat, dear, perspiration, corrected Miss Carlyle. Anna described the Indians covered in terrifying swirls of paint who shot you with poisoned arrows which paralysed you and made you mad. From Rose came jaguars silent as shadows which pounced on anyone who dared to go into the forest. Miss Carlyle now raised a hand and looked worriedly at Maya. The girl was pale and silent, and she was very sorry now that she told the class to find out what they could. And you, Maya? What did you find out? Maya rose to her feet. She had written notes, but she didn't look at them, and when she began to speak, she held her head high, for her time in the library had changed everything. The Amazon is the largest river in the world. The Nile is a little bit longer, but the Amazon has the most water. It used to be called the River Sea because of that, and all over Brazil there are rivers that run into it. Some of the rivers are black and some are brown, and the ones that run in from the south are blue, and this is because of what's under the water. When I go, I shall travel on a boat of the Booth Line, and it will take 4 weeks to go across the Atlantic, and then when I get to Brazil, I still have to travel 1,000 miles along the river between trees that lean over the water, and there will be scarlet birds and sandbanks and creatures like guinea pigs called capybaras, which you can tame. And after another 2 weeks on the boat, I shall reach the city of Manaus, which is a beautiful place with a theatre with a green and golden roof and shops and hotels, just like there are here, because the people who grew rubber out there became very rich, and so they could build such a place, even in the middle of the jungle. And that is where I shall be met by Mr. and Mrs. Carter and by Beatrice and Gwendolen. She broke off and grinned at her classmates. And after that, I don't know, but it's going to be all right. But she needed all her courage as she stood in the hall a month later saying goodbye. Her trunk was corded, her travelling cape lay in a small suitcase, which was all she was allowed to take into the cabin, and she stood in a circle of her friends. Hermione was crying. The youngest pupil, Dora, was clutching her skirt. "Don't go, Maya," she wailed. "I don't want you to go. Who's going to tell me stories?" "We'll miss you," shrieked Melanie. "Don't step on a boa constrictor." "Right. Oh, please write lots and lots and lots of letters." Last-minute presents had been stuffed into her case. A slightly strange pincushion made by Anna, a set of ribbons for her hair. The teachers too had come to see her off, and the maids were coming upstairs. "You'll be all right, miss," they said. "You'll have a lovely time." But they looked at her with pity. Piranhas and alligators were in the air, and the housemaid, who had sat up most of the night with Maya after she'd heard of her parents' death, was wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. The headmistress now came down the stairs, followed by Miss Emily, and everyone made way for her as she came up to Maya. But the farewell speech Miss Banks had prepared was never made. Instead, she came forward and put her arms around Maya, who vanished for the last time into the folds of her tremendous bosom. "Farewell, my child," she said, "and God bless you." And then the porter came and said the carriage was at the door. The girls followed Maya out onto the street, but at the sight of the black-clad women sitting stiffly in the back of the cab, her hands on her umbrella, Maya faltered. This was Miss Minton, the governess, who was going to take care of her on the journey. "Oh, doesn't she look fierce?" whispered Melanie. "Poor you," mumbled Hermione. And indeed the tall, gaunt woman looked more like a rake or a nutcracker than a human being. The door of the cab opened. A hand in a black glove, bony and cold as a skeleton, was stretched out to help her. Maya took it, and followed by the shrieks of her schoolmates, they set off. For the first part of the journey, Maya kept her eyes on the side of the road. Now that she was really leaving her friends, it was hard to hold back her tears. She'd reached the gulping stage when she heard a loud snapping noise and turned her head. Miss Minton had opened the metal clasp of her large black handbag and was handing a clean handkerchief embroidered with the initial A. "Myself," said the governess in her deep, gruff voice, "I would think how lucky I was, how fortunate." "Not to go to the Amazon, you mean?" "To have so many friends who were sad to see me go." "Didn't you have friends who minded you leaving?" Miss Minton's thin lips twitched for a moment. "My sister's budgerigar, perhaps, if he had understood what was happening, which is extremely doubtful." Maya turned her head. Miss Minton was certainly a most extraordinary-looking person. Her eyes, behind thick, dark-rimmed spectacles, were the colour of mud. Her mouth was narrow, her nose thin and sharp, and her black felt hat was tethered to her sparse bun of hair with a fearsome hat-pin in the shape of a Viking spear. "It's copied from the armour of Erix the Hammerer," said Miss Minton, following Maya's gaze. "One can kill with a hat-pin like that." Both of them fell silent again, until the cab lurched suddenly and Miss Minton's umbrella clattered to the floor. It was quite the largest and ugliest umbrella Maya had ever seen, with a steel spike and a long shaft ending in a handled shape like the beak of a bird of prey. Miss Minton, however, was looking carefully at a crack in the handle, which had been mended with glue. "Did you break it before?" Maya asked politely. "Yes." She peered at the hideous umbrella through her thick glasses. "I broke it on the back of a boy called Henry Hartington," she said. Mia shrank back. "How?" she began, but her mouth had gone dry. "I threw him on the ground and knelt on him and belaboured him with my umbrella," said Miss Minton. "Hard for a very long time." She leant back in her seat, looking almost happy. Maya swallowed. What had he done? "He had tried to stuff a small spaniel puppy through the wire mesh of his father's tennis court." "Oh, was it badly hurt, the puppy?" "Yes." "What happened to it?" "One leg was dislocated and his eye was scratched. The gardener managed to set the leg, but we couldn't do anything about his eye." "How did Henry's mother punish him?" "She didn't. Oh dear me, no. I was dismissed instead without a reference." Miss Minton turned away. The year that followed, when she could not get another job and had to stay with her married sister, was one that she was not willing to remember or discuss. The cab stopped. They had reached Euston Station. Miss Minton waved her umbrella at a porter, and Maya's trunk and her suitcase were lifted onto a trolley. Then came a battered tin trunk with the letters A. Minton painted on the side. "You'll need 2 men for that," said the governess. The porter looked offended. "Not me, I'm strong." But when he came to lift the trunk, he staggered. "Crikey, Ma'am, what have you got in there?" he asked. Miss Minton looked at him haughtily and did not answer. Then she led Maya onto the platform where the train waited to take them to Liverpool and the RMS Cardinal bound for Brazil. They were streaming out of the station before Maya asked, "Was it books in the trunk?" "It was books," admitted Miss Minton, and Maya said, "Good." Chapter 2. The Cardinal was a beautiful ship, a snow-white liner with slender light blue funnel. She had 2 staterooms, a dining room, and lots of deck space where people could lie about and drink beef tea or play games. "Isn't it lovely?" said Maya, and she imagined herself standing by the rail with the wind in her face as she watched the porpoises play and the white birds wheel and circle overhead. But the beginning of the voyage wasn't at all like that, because the ship, after it left Lisbon, the Cardinal ran into storms. Great green waves loomed up like mountains, and the ship rolled and shuddered and pitched. Hardly anyone got as far as the dining room, and the doors to the decks were closed so that any passengers still on their legs did not get washed overboard. Myra and Miss Minton shared a cabin with 2 Portuguese ladies who spent their time in their bunks groaning and being sick and praying to the Virgin and begging to die. Maya thought this was going too far, but it is true that being seasick is so awful that people do sometimes wish that the ship would simply sink and put them out of their misery. Maya wasn't seasick, and nor was Miss Minton. They didn't feel exactly hungry, but they managed to get to the dining room, holding on to everything they could find, and to eat some of the soup which the waiters poured into the bowls, fastened onto the table with a special gadget that came out in the storms. It is difficult not to feel superior when everyone is being ill and you aren't, and Maya couldn't help being a little bit pleased with herself. This lasted until Miss Minton, hanging onto the saloon rail with her long black arms, said that this would be a good time to start learning Portuguese. "We shall be undisturbed." Maya thought this was a bad idea. Maybe the twins could teach me. They must speak it if they've been there for so long. "You don't want to arrive in a country unable to make yourself understood. Everyone speaks Portuguese in Brazil. Even the Indians mix it in with their own languages." But the lessons did not go very well. Miss Minton had found a book about the family of Senor and Senora Alvidares and their children Pedro and Silvinia, who did all the things that people do in phrase books, like losing their luggage and finding a fly in their soup, but fixing their eyes on a page when the boat was heaving made them feel definitely queasy. Trying to read when you're being tossed about is not a good idea. Then on the second day of the storm, Maya made her way to the main stateroom, where the passengers were supposed to sit and enjoy their drinks and have parties. Miss Minton was helping the Portuguese ladies, and Maya wanted to get out of the way. It was a huge room with plush red sofas screwed to the floor, and long gilt-edged mirrors lined the walls, and at first she thought it was empty. Then she saw a boy of about her own age peering into one of the mirrors on the far wall. He had fair hair, long and curly, and was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, velvet knickerbockers and a belted jacket too short in the sleeves, and when he turned around she saw that he was looking unhappy and afraid. "Are you feeling sick?" she asked him. "No, but I'm getting a spot," he said, pointing to his chin. His voice trembled, and to her amazement Maya saw that his big blue eyes had filled with tears. "It's not chicken pox," said Maya firmly. "We just had chicken pox at school and it doesn't look like that." "I know it isn't chicken pox. It's a spot because I'm growing up. There's another one starting on my forehead." He lifted his blonde curls to show Maya, but at that moment the boat tilted violently and she had to wait till the boy was level with her again to see the small red pimple over his right eye. "And the other day, my voice suddenly cracked. It went down a whole octave. If it happens on stage, I'm finished." "Of course. You came with those actors, didn't you? The Pilgrim Players," said Maya. She remembered now seeing a whole crowd of oddly dressed people getting on at Lisbon, talking at the top of their voices and waving their arms. "But surely the spots won't show under your makeup." "I can't wear makeup on my voice. If it cracks in Little Lord Fauntleroy, they'll throw me out." "They won't do that," said Maya firmly. "You're a child. People don't throw children out like that." "Oh, don't they?" said the boy. He looked at Maya, her neat, expensive clothes, her carefully braided hair. "You don't know what it's like." The boat lurched again, throwing the children against each other, and they struggled towards a sofa fastened to the floor. The boy's name was Clovis King. It's not my real name. My real name is Jimmy Bates, but they changed it when they adopted me. Who did? Who adopted you? The Goodleys, Mr. and Mrs. Goodley. They own the acting company and they play most of the leads. Then there's Mrs. Goodley's daughter Nancy. She's awful. And Mrs. Goodley's sister and Mr. Goodley's nephew. He's the stage manager and does the box office. And old Mrs. Goodley does the costumes, but she can't see too well. They found me when they were on their way to York. I was playing cricket on the village green with my friends, and they said they'd teach me to act and play juvenile leads, all the children's parts, and the page boys and all that stuff. Because I had a good voice and could sing, and I looked all right. Didn't your parents mind? I don't have any parents. I was living with my foster mother. She cried and cried when I went, but the Goodleys said it'd be a good chance for me. I could make a lot of money and come back rich and famous. But I don't make any money because no one ever gets paid, and we're always in debt, and we just trail about from one awful hot place to another. But isn't it fun, the acting and the travelling? No, it isn't. We stay in beastly hotels full of bedbugs and the food makes us feel sick. My foster mother used to be a cook in a big house. She made told in the hole and treacle pudding and custard, and I had a clean vest every day, said Clovis. And once again his eyes filled with tears. We haven't been back to England for 4 years. And if they throw me out, I'll never get back there on my own because I don't have any money. Maya did her best to comfort him. But later when she was alone with Miss Minton, she said, could they do that? Could they actually throw him out? Unlikely, said the governess. It depends on whether they adopted him legally or not. But when the sea became calm again and the passengers came out onto deck, they weren't so sure. The Goodleys were not exactly nasty, but they behaved as if no one existed in the world except themselves. Mr. Goodley was tall with a red face, white hair and loud braying voice. Mrs. Goodley's hair was dyed a fierce red and she wore layers of scarves and boas and shawls which got caught in things. And Nancy Goodley, who was 19, simpered and minced and ordered everybody about. As well as the Goodleys, there was an Italian couple, the Santorinis, who did the music and the dancing, and a very old man whose false teeth were so white that one wanted to blink when one looked at him. He's got another set of teeth for when he plays villains. They're yellow with black holes in them, and they're terrifying, whispered Clovis. The first thing Mr. Godley did when all the actors had piled onto the deck was to move away the other passengers who were trying to read or have a game of quoits. We must be quite undisturbed for at least 2 hours, he said. Then they started doing their acting exercises. Mr. Godley had invented these, and he was very proud of them. He'd even written a book about them, but nobody would publish it. First, everybody threw out their chests and made the air go from the bottom of their spines to their throats in a "oh" sound. They then flopped forward and wiggled their shoulders, and one of Mrs. Goodley's scarves came off. After that, they threw their arms out towards the sea and cried, "Merry to the right," while their faces became violently cheerful. And then they threw them to the other direction and cried, "Merry to the left." When they had done merry to the right and merry to the left, they did wretched to the right and wretched to the left, and their faces stopped being cheerful and became extremely sad. Clovis had to join in with the others, but whenever he could, he came over to talk to Maya and Miss Minton and ask them questions about England. Do they still play conkers? He wanted to know. And make a guy on bonfire night? And what about snowmen? Has there been a lot of snow? Yeah, it was good last year, said Maya. We always run out when the first flakes fall and try to catch them on our tongues. The first snow tastes like nothing else in the world. Clovis agreed, but the thought of tasting things set him off on what he missed most about England. The food. Oh, did you have semolina bake for pudding? The kind with squelchy raisins in it? And what about jam roly-poly and plum duff with cornflour sauce? Maya said yes, they had all of those at school. But she couldn't help being sorry for Clovis, who was so homesick for the stodgy puddings. She hoped never to eat them again. When they had finished their exercises, the company started rehearsing scenes from the plays they were going to do. One of these was the sleepwalking scene from Macbeth. Miss Godley was Lady Macbeth, of course, and Maya thought she was very stirring, tottering about all over the place and muttering, "Out, damn Spot!" with a terrible leer. So she was rather hurt when Miss Minton, who'd been reading, closed her book and got ready to go below. "Don't you like Shakespeare?" asked Maya. Miss Minton gave her a look. "I rank Shakespeare as second only to God," she said, "which is why I'm going to my cabin." Clovis didn't have much to do in Macbeth. Mr. Goodley had cut most of the parts with children, but the next wet day they rehearsed Little Lord Fauntleroy. Maya had read the book. It was soppy, but a good story all the same, and she thought Clovis acted really very well. He was the hero, of course, the little American boy who finds he's the heir to a great castle in England, owned by his crusty old grandfather, the Earl. The boy's name was Cedric, and he called his mother Dearest, and together they travelled to England and melted the heart of the Earl and did good to the tenants, and they were loved by everybody. "I thought you were very good," said Maya. "Can't be easy to call your mother Dearest." "No, it isn't, especially when she's Nancy Goodley, who'd pinch you as soon as look at you. And your voice didn't wobble in the least." Clovis looked worried again. "It better not. Beastly Lord Fauntleroy is supposed to be 7 years old." He told Maya that they were staying for 2 weeks in Belem, the first port on the Amazon, and then were going to Manaus. "It's a really good theatre there. Usually we wouldn't get a booking in a big place like that, but the ballet company who were going to come had to cancel. We're putting on a matinee of Fauntleroy every day. If that goes well, we might be able to clear our debts. But if not..." "Of course it'll go well, and I'm so glad you're going to play in Manaus, because I'll be able to come and see you." It seemed to her really sad that a boy should have to worry about getting spots, and that she shouldn't be at all excited about travelling to the Amazon. They were sailing into warm waters now, and the sun shone day after day, and the sea was a brilliant blue. But Clovis hated the heat. When he wasn't following Maya about and asking her about Yorkshire pudding and apple crumble, he lay under a fan and swatted flies and sighed. "I must get back to England," he said, and made them tell him again about tobogganing and skating on frozen ponds and muffins afterwards for tea. "My foster mother made the best muffins in the world," he said. For Maya, it was quite different. When she was small, her parents had taken her along when they went to dig up ancient ruins in Greece and Egypt. She remembered the happiness of being warm every night and the freedom of the camp. And the closer she got to her destination, the more certain she became that what she had felt these on the ladder in the library were true, and that this new country was for her. "I'm going to stay with twins," she told Clovis. "Twins are special, don't you think, like Romulus and Remus, although they were brought up by wolves, of course." "But if they're nice, it'll be all right," said Clovis. "But if they're nasty, you'll have a double dose." "They won't be nasty," said Maya. When they'd been at sea for nearly 4 weeks, they came on deck one morning to smell not only tar and engine oil and the salt in the wind, but a warm, rich, smouldering smell. The smell not just of land, but of the jungle. And within a few hours they saw a dark line of trees fringed by surf. And then they steamed into the mouth of the river and put down anchor at Belem. It was here that the pilgrim players left the ship. They disembarked with as many shouts and arm wavings as when they came on board. Maya and Clovis hugged each other. She was really sorry to see him go. She gave him her address at the Carters so that he could come and see her as soon as he arrived in Manaus. The name of the house is Tanferini. That means a beautiful place of rest. Miss Minton says so it's sure to be beautiful, she said. "The twins will be excited to see a proper actor." "And you'll come and see me in the play?" "I promise," said Maya. "I absolutely promise." Clovis didn't hug Maya. He hugged Miss Minton too. It struck Maya that although he was afraid of so many things, he didn't seem to be afraid of the fierce-looking governess. The journey down the Amazon was one that Maya never forgot. In places the river was so wide that she understood why it was called the River Sea, and they sailed between distant lines of trees. But sometimes they made their way between islands, and then on the sandbanks they saw some of the creatures that Maya had read about. Once a litter of capybaras lumbered after their mother, and they were close enough to see their funny snouts and sandy fur. Once they passed a tree whose roots had been killed by the rise of the water, and its bare branches were full of scarlet and blue parakeets, which flew up screeching when the boat came past. And once Maya saw a grey log lying in the shallows, which suddenly came into life. "Look," she said, alligator. My first one." And a man standing close by nodded and said he was glad that she knew that there were no crocodiles in this part of the world. "You'd be surprised how many people never learn." They passed plantations of rubber trees and Indian villages, with the houses built on stilts to stop them being flooded when the river rose. The Indian children came out onto the landing stage and waved and called out, and Maya waved back and didn't stop till they were out of sight. Sometimes the boat went close enough to the shore for them to pass by old houses owned by sugar planters or coffee exporters. They could see the verandas with the families taking tea and the dogs stretched out in the shade and hanging baskets of scarlet flowers. "Will it be like that?" Maya kept asking. "They'll surely have a veranda, aren't they? Perhaps we can do lessons looking out over the river." She was becoming more and more excited. The colour, the friendly waving Indians, the flashing birds all delighted her, and she was not troubled by the heat. But at the centre of all her thoughts were the twins. She saw them in white dresses with coloured sashes like pictures in a book, laughing and welcoming and friendly. She imagined them getting ready for bed, brushing each other's hair, and lying on a hammock with a basket full of kittens on their lap or picking flowers for the house. They'll have a big garden going down to the river, don't you think?" she asked Miss Minton. "And a boat with a striped awning probably. I don't really like fishing because of the hooks, but if they showed me, I suppose you could live off the land in a place like that." Since the letter the twins had written to her was only 2 sentences long, Maya was free to make up their lives, and she did this endlessly. "I wonder if they've tamed a lot of animals. I should think they would have, don't you? Coatis get very tame. Or maybe they'll have a little pet monkey, a little capuchin that sits on their shoulders, and a parakeet," she asked Miss Minton, who told her to wait and see, and set her another exercise in her Portuguese grammar. But whatever Miss Minton said made no difference. In Maya's head, the twins paddled their boat between giant water lilies, trekked fearlessly through the jungle at night, playing piano duets, sending the music out into the velvet night. "They'll know the names of everything too, won't they? Those orange lilies. No one seems to know what they're called," said Maya. "The names will be in a book," said Miss Minton, quelling. But she might have spared her breath as Maya wandered further and further into the lives of Gwendolen and Beatrice. "They'll shorten their own names, do you think? Gwen, perhaps, and Beatty." It occurred to Maya that Miss Minton knew quite a lot about the creatures they came across along the river, and when her governess pointed out freshwater dolphins swimming ahead of them, she plucked up courage to ask what had made her decide to come out to the Amazon. Miss Minton stared out over the rails. At first she didn't answer, and Maya blushed, feeling that she'd maybe been impertinent. Then she said, "I knew someone once who came out to live here. He wrote to me once in a while. It made me want to see the place myself." "Oh," Maya was pleased. Perhaps Miss Minton had a friend here and would not be lonely. "Is he still here, your friend?" The pause this time was longer. "No," said Miss Minton. "He died." After a week of sailing down the river, they stopped at Santorum, a port where a big market had been set up. The passengers were allowed ashore, and it was now that Maya heard the familiar snap and saw that Miss Minton had opened her large black handbag. "Mr. Murray gave me some money for you to spend on the journey. Is there anything you want to buy?" Maya's eyes shone. "Presents for the twins, and perhaps for Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I should have done it in England, but it was all such a rush. Have I got enough?" "Yes," said Miss Minton dryly, handing over a packet of notes. She would have been glad to earn in 3 months what Mr. Murray had given Maya, yet she had to admit that Maya seemed to be quite unspoilt. The market was dazzling. There were watermelons bigger than babies, and green bananas and yellow ones, and some of them were almost orange. There were piles of nuts heaped up on barrows, and pineapples and peppers and freshly caught fish that had been dried. There were animals tugging at their ropes, and delicate lacework and silverware in woven baskets and leather bags. And selling them, talking and laughing, were beautiful black women in brilliantly coloured bandanas, and Indians in European clothes, and Indians with painted chests and feathers, and slender Brazilian girls with golden skin. But buying presents for the twins was far from easy, because Maya was sure that what they would really like was some fluffy baby chicks or a duckling or even a white mouse. "Things that are alive are always the best presents," she said. But Miss Minton was firm. "You can't buy them animals till you know what pets they already have. You don't want to get your presents eaten on the first day. So Maya bought 2 lace collars for the twins and an embroidered shawl for Mrs. Carter, and for Mr. Carter, a leather wallet with a picture of a jaguar on it. Then she disappeared, and Miss Minton was just getting anxious when she came back carrying a blue fringed parasol with a curved handle. "Because you ruined your umbrella on Henry Hartington," she said, "and this will be better for you in the sun." "And you, Maya, what did you get for yourself?" But the only thing Maya wanted was a mongrel puppy scratching its fleas in a wicker basket, and once again Miss Minton was firm. "They'd probably have a dog already to guard the house," she said. "Several, I dare say." And Maya had to be content with that. They still had a few days to travel down the brown, leaf-stained river, then a few hours before they were due to dock at Manaus. The passengers were called on deck by a loudspeaker and shown a famous sight. They had come to the wedding of the waters, where the brown waters of the Amazon joined the black waters of the River Negro, and they could see that the 2 rivers flowing distinct and side by side. Then, as they steamed up the Negro, Maya saw the green and golden dome of the theatre. She saw church spires and the yellow building of the customs house. They had reached Manaus. They had arrived.